What happens when the battle for the truth moves from the courtroom to the womb? Welcome back to Everyday Reformation. We're continuing our conversation this week with Ben Dupre. And if you missed part one, go back and listen to it first. In that first part, Ben shared his story of standing beside Chief Justice Roy Moore during the Ten Commandments monument case, which is a defining moment for Christian courage in our time, especially here in Alabama. In the second part, we're going to shift gears to another front in the same war, the fight for life. We'll talk through abortion, IVF, and adoption, and what it means for believers to hold fast to a biblical conviction in a culture that's still at war with God's design for life itself. So let's jump right back in with Ben Dupre and Pastor Brandon Scroggins as they continue the conversation.
Well, let's continue to move. Hey, let's move to something a little less controversial, a little more lighthearted. Let's talk about abortion and pro-life.
Ooh,
And
wow. There's a pivot.
why don't we top it off with IVF? So you begin to have a real heart for pro-life issues, overturning Roe versus Wade. You mentioned earlier when we were talking, reaching as far back to junior high school. So can you outline a little bit about how you became passionate about pro-life work, just the contours of how you've seen that battlefront develop, and then reaching all the way back to your role in the state Supreme Court, IVF, and just the way that's developed, overturning of Roe versus Wade. You're in junior high school at that point, and even senior high and college. Overturning Roe versus Wade, does that feel a bit like an impossible task in some ways?
Yeah. No, that's a good question, because by then there had been a chance to overturn it in the Casey case in the early 90s. And the Supreme Court just dunked on conservative pro-lifers. And, we thought we're never going to get Roe versus Wade overturned. So as a kid coming up, and like you guys, I survived, Roe versus Wade. I made it out of the womb. Thankfully, I had parents, that wanted me, were believers. But I had a pastor. I had a pastor friend who was very involved, and he was actually the school principal where I was, and he was involved in pro-life ministry in Western New York, which, as you can imagine, is a hard field, because New York is very much a pro-abortion state, unfortunately. So I got involved. I was able to win a little essay contest in the school, and I went to Albany, which is the state capital of New York, and we did a little pro-life lobbying there. There were actually pro-life Democrats back in those days in New York, believe it or not. And we would talk to them and encourage them, to pass pro-life legislation. So that was both kind of the pro-life activist that got birthed in me, and advocate at the policy and legal level, and had strong pro-life leaders like Flip Benham. If you know Flip Benham's name, he was part of Operation Save America. His sons, Jason and
Jason
the Benham
Storms.
brothers. The Benham brothers that came out of Liberty. Jason Storms is now, the head of Operation Save America, kind of two leaders down from Flip. I remember him coming to my church, and he encouraged me to be, I remember him pointing at me and telling me I was going to be on the U.S. Supreme Court someday. But because we wanted Roe to fall. We knew that was the high wicked Molech of our generation, and unfortunately of several generations. So that was a major motivation for me to go to law school. Obviously, a Christian law school. There were a lot of other folks that were out to take down Roe versus Wade. And you talk about that judicial supremacy idea, the idea that a court could create a constitutional right and protect it, and define it willy-nilly, and tell every state that they cannot protect their unborn children. It was absurd, but it was one of those, emperor has no clothes moment, But men like Roy Moore kept poking at this judicial supremacy idea, and he would call their bluff. That it was not based on anything but other people believing that they had this authority and power. Fake.
So, what are some other ways you've been engaged in that issue, and what do you think Christians need to know about this issue?
I think you need to go find where where the attack on pro-life is happening. And what is that today, now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned? That's a good question. It doesn't look the same. There are no open abortion clinics like there were just a few years ago in Alabama. My wife and I, when we started courting, that was our ministry we decided to do. There were 2 abortion clinics in Montgomery, Alabama, so there was plenty to go do, and we would go and pray outside. We'd try to talk young women out of, and I mean young women, that were some being dragged in there by family members from going in and destroying their children. Through the years, it was whittled down to 1. The state finally started. I mean, there's just lots of lessons. The state started finally actually inspecting the clinics. They were supposed to do that every year, but in the early 2000s, they weren't. And these places were just disgusting butcher shops, as you can imagine. Well, once the state started actually showing up and looking around and seeing if they cleaned the instruments between patients, if they followed basic health code provisions, one by one, those clinics started closing. Some permanently, some were able to reopen on the promise that they would be better.
Did you see any success stories as far as and being out there and ministering, trying to get them to change their mind?
Yes. But a lot of it was throwing seed on hard ground. Sometimes they would leave and you don't know why. Very rarely would they stop and talk to you on the way out and say, "We're going home. Thank you." Those were so rewarding. I got to lead a young lady once from the abortion clinic to a pregnancy center here in town, and got to see the picture of her baby when he was saved and born.
Wow.
And she was forever grateful. So, but it's a hard thing. And so what does that look like now? We don't have clinics in Alabama, thankfully. Like I'm very grateful to our legislators that had the foresight even before Roe fell to pass a law that immediately went into effect. But I think in Alabama, we think that abortion is over, that there are no abortions happening. And you've heard me talk on this before. Not only are they happening, but it's coming by mail from out of state with no doctor involved, probably a lot of lies involved. These women are getting abortion pills. That's 60% or higher of nationwide abortions are now done. Chemical abortions, mailed to your house or given to you by a doctor, which is legal in other states. But it is perfectly legal for a woman in Alabama to get online to order abortion pills, and they're sent to her. And she basically kills her own baby in her own home. And she also usually suffers a lot, but has a lot of incentive to keep it quiet. So this is happening across our state, and I don't think most people are aware of that because we don't see it. So I guess what I'm saying is there is still pro-life work to be done. And we need to figure out how to reach these women, probably a lot of college students. I was at a pro-life clinic yesterday in Auburn, Alabama. And I said, "Do you see a lot of Auburn students here?" You know what they said? They said, "No, most of them are on the pill, or they get the abortion pill sent to them."
Wow.
So no longer is the model of woman is pregnant, she goes to a clinic. It's woman is pregnant, she gets on Google.
Wow.
So that's where the fight is.
Now, certainly we want to share the gospel. We want to minister to individuals. We want to see the culture change. But where are we legally on that front?
So, again, Alabama has, I would say, the strongest pro-life laws in that it is illegal for a doctor or a third person to perform an abortion on a woman. It is entirely legal for a woman to take the abortion pill and kill her own baby. And that is a giant loophole. And it's uncomfortable to hear and to talk about. So how do we reach those women? One thing is that pro-life clinics are offering pill reversal, abortion pill reversal. There is actually medication.
I'm hearing about that.
Yes. If the woman has taken the first pill, it's a 2-pill regimen. If she's taken the first pill within a certain amount of time, it can be reversed. And there is a lot of women I've been told they take that first pill and feel immediate regret.
Yeah, I hear the same thing. Their conscience is just stricken.
Yeah, because they've hardened themselves. And you see this back when women were going into clinics in Alabama, that you can just tell they've, like when you're going into an
Yeah.
exam, right? You
Mhm.
just like, I got to get out my courage. And so they harden their heart, they kind of lean into it and they go.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they must do that as well. There's that searing your own conscience to do an act you know is wrong. But as soon as they take that pill, a lot of them feel regret. But they can get it reversed. They can go to these pro-life clinics, and they can give them certain pill to reverse that. And there are babies that are being saved that way. So that's where some of the battle is.
Yeah.
So if if your daughter, God forbid, or a family member says, "Oh no, I'm pregnant," I've taken the pill. That's one thing I want your folks to know. Nobody
Mhm.
wants to hear that, either of those things.
Yeah.
That there's a unexpected pregnancy, and out of sin, but then they've done the double whammy of the David double whammy murder and sexual impropriety, and they've now killed, or they've started the process. It can be reversed. I think.
And
you
I have
know that.
found as well for our listeners, this would be an entirely different topic. So just by way of mention that a lot of things that some people think are birth control, or even in their minds would consider them to be birth control, really need more investigation
Mm.
to consider what we're actually doing,
Mhm.
and the bill of false goods that we possibly have bought.
Brandon, is there an issue that you're not going to get me in trouble with on this podcast?
Probably not. Keep
Because
going.
But your point is valid. There's a fine line between the abortion pill and how sometimes things like emergency contraception, so called, and even the birth control pill.
Mhm.
And I would encourage your folks to carefully look at that.
Mhm.
Most people do not realize that the birth control pill can, as a backup,
Mhm.
prevent implantation of an already formed embryo.
Yes.
Mm.
Most people thinks it prevents
Yes, yes, yeah.
fertilization, and it can't. That's the main purpose. But the
Mhm.
backup thing it does is it makes the womb inhospitable to implantation.
Yeah.
Mm.
And most well-meaning pro-lifers who were just told, maybe even by their
Mhm.
pastor and their parents, just go on the pill until you're quote unquote ready to have children.
Yeah.
They don't even know that. And that's a shocker to a lot of them. Probably not a shocker to your congregation, but
Among a lot of the other issues that we now have begun to realize that birth control is causing in women's bodies.
Mhm.
Let's keep moving. So that is a continued raging battlefront. We celebrate the overturning of Roe versus Wade, but we keep fighting. Now, what about IVF? So right here in Montgomery, with our state Supreme Court, with our Chief Justice, we see again the battleground for this issue. And,
Yeah.
and the issue of IVF is a larger issue, but
Yeah.
can you just walk us through
Mhm.
your involvement in that, where that is, and just things to be mindful of?
Yeah, again, that's perfect example of the facts of what happened,
Mhm.
and then the narrative that the media runs with, right?
Mhm.
I remember seeing a Google News report that said Tom Parker opened his Bible and shut down the IVF clinics in Alabama.
Mhm.
And I thought, everything you just said is wrong.
Mm.
Mhm.
So let's go with what happened. Like, IVF is somewhat controversial, not just in the actual treatment of it, but then in how you care for the embryos or whether you don't. And so what had happened in this case, there was a clinic in Mobile, as there's several around our state, and as there is in every country, or excuse me, every state in the country. And they perform IVF, and many families have had children that way. But then because of the process, there are these other embryos after the process is over that don't get implanted. What happens to those?
Mhm.
And I think for most people, that's where the controversy is.
Because we have to define personhood
Yeah.
and where personhood begins.
And if we truly believe, as
Mhm.
any pro-lifer will say, that it
Right.
begins at conception,
Conception.
not contraception. Sometimes it begins despite contraception.
So those are children.
Those are children from fertilization. I mean, this is what we say, right? From
Right.
conception to natural death. Well, when is an IVF child conceived?
Mhm.
It's outside the womb.
Mhm.
That's the nature of putting the DNA material together,
Mhm.
and it's still God that forms that life. I
Mhm.
mean, we put the seed in the ground, God gives the increase. I still think the Lord does bless that, even though it's a bit of an artificial
Mhm.
way of doing it, but we still have little lives formed
Mhm.
with separate DNA.
Mm.
So what do we do with those?
What do we do with them? So at this clinic, they were storing them in cryogenic freezers, like a lot of them do, because the couple, they had made a certain number of embryos, they had implanted, had children that way, but these other embryos were in the freezer, so to speak. As it turns out, it appears a patient in a nearby room got into the freezer and got some of these frozen embryos in their test tubes or whatever container they were in, pulled them out, dropped them on the floor, and they perished.
Mm-hmm.
Again, what were they? Right? What were they in that freezer? What were they as they perished on the ground? They were microscopic.
Mm-hmm.
So there's some people who would dehumanize them. There always is. And so the parents of those little embryos that perished sued the clinic.
Mm-hmm.
And they sued them for wrongful death of a minor. Well, the trial judge in Mobile said, nope, not a person, can't sue for wrongful death of a minor. Went up to the Alabama Supreme Court, where the question was, are these embryos minors under the meaning of the wrongful death of a minor statute?
And to declare that they're not persons does not solve the problem. It just creates a bigger one, because then you got to define when personhood begins. So, but they are. So,
I mean, the question is, if they're not a person, what are they?
Right, right.
And when do they become a person? This is the question that the other side is constantly running from.
Yeah, right.
You say it's not at this point. Well, when is it? When's that magic point that it becomes a human, a person? And then what is it before that point?
Right.
They also can't define that. Well, so that was the legal question, was can these IVF parents bring a lawsuit against the clinic for wrongful death? And so and it was Justice J. Mitchell who wrote the majority opinion for the court. I think it was 7-2. So there's 7 justices on the court agreed, yes, this was a child under the meaning of the statute. These parents can sue.
By the which, I think that's what I read. What I read that came from the court was filled with Bible, was filled with Calvin, was filled with theology, was grounded in God's word.
That was Chief Justice Parker's special writing.
Justice Parker.
You're right.
Yeah.
It was there. But he wasn't joined by anybody else. He wrote that himself because he kind of wanted to.
And it was masterful.
I mean, if I won't say why he wrote it, because I was working for him at the time. You can read it and you can see what he was talking about.
Yeah.
He was kind of adding to what the majority opinion found, which was a very straightforward statutory interpretation. Yes, these are children. They're a minor under the meaning of the statute, and it includes embryonic children. And there were 2 dissenting opinions in that case that you can also read. And Chief Justice Parker, wrote, of course, my unbiased opinion, an excellent opinion. And he did talk about the theological underpinnings, because the people of Alabama, this was an important part of the case, had voted in an amendment saying that it is the public policy of our state to protect the sanctity of human life. So he talked about that phrase, the sanctity of life, of human life, and what that meant. And it had a particular theological bent to it. It wasn't just human life is cool. There's a sanctity of it. And what does that mean? And he talked about, of course, what the Declaration of Independence talks about, that it's God who gives us the right to life.
Yeah.
And so, he does quote Calvin, and any of your parishioners should be studying that opinion. But and so from that, you get this idea that it was a theocratic decision, which they mean is a bad thing, and it was it was all these things, but it really just came down to reading the law and applying it to protect all minors,
which I think is really the target of this discussion. It's not, in my mind, so much about IVF or no IVF.
No.
It's about personhood. What are we doing with these people? What are we doing with these children? And that even escalates even beyond. We had something that really touched home with us. We've adopted twin babies, and they have muscular dystrophy. So I was talking with someone that I dearly love, and we were talking about how someone that they know very well was, doing the screening. They're preparing to have children, and they're going through IVF and so forth, and they're realizing that some of these children are going to have, or at least one would have, muscular dystrophy. So they said, of course, we did not go with that one. and we went with the genetically superior, or what promised to be.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, do you know who you're talking to? I have twin babies with muscular dystrophy, and I could not be more proud and thankful of both of them that they were given a chance at life. We're not thinking about what we're doing in that issue, I think, is the problem.
And, during that IVF case, I heard people who self-identified as pro-life using the term potential life to refer to IVF embryo or IVF created embryos. And I'm thinking, potential life. This is what the pro-aborts say. This is what they call unborn children, potential life. That these sneaky adjectives, these euphemisms to dehumanize. And
because
if
language
people
matters,
knew in the IVF process how much discrimination, and that's what it is, goes on with that microscope. They're looking at microscopic embryos and making a judgment call on which are worthy of implantation and which are not. And I would say the fortunate ones are frozen, but many are simply discarded.
Yeah.
But it happens on the microscopic level, so we don't hear them scream.
Yeah. It's been rightly said, when words lose their meaning, people lose their lives, and how this comes to the heart of that. You can't leave. We have a couple of more issues we've got to get to, Ben. There's so many hot button issues. There's so many pressing issues. Let's look at the flip side positively. Your role in adoption and foster care.
Yeah.
What does that look like? What do you see God doing there?
It's a beautiful thing. I mentioned being at a crisis pregnancy center yesterday, and the reason I was there was because twin boys had gotten saved. They could have been aborted, but their birth mom chose life. And she made the very difficult but beautiful decision to give them up for adoption. And so I have had the privilege these past 9 months of working with the adoption law firm. And I see it as a natural extension of the pro-life work I've done. Save them from destruction in the womb. But a lot of them are born into very difficult situations, or really no family to speak of at all. And so continuing to help orphans find forever homes has been just such a joy since January, since I left the Alabama Supreme Court. So just being able to do that, and just it's beautiful. There are, like yourselves, just heroes who are willing to open their homes to children not their own. And to me, it is such a picture of the gospel, of Christ paying the price so that the Father can say, "You who are not mine are now mine.
Yeah.
You who are not my own, I now make you my own, and I give you my name."
Yeah.
And it's such a beautiful picture of the gospel. And I love that moment. And there was an adoption I was a part of where the judge said, "No, I'm going to say this name, and it'll be the last time that this name will ever be spoken."
Wow.
And he said it. And then we continued to go through. And then he approved the judgment, the final judgment. And he said, "And now his name is this." And it was a beautiful moment of the past is gone. What could have been is gone. And now this family, this child is going to be raised by a godly Christian family committed to him. It's an irrevocable thing too.
Yeah.
We have to tell these adoptive parents, as you know, there's no going back on this. There's no, you can't get you don't unadopt. This is irrevocable, irreversible, permanent. They are your child now. You can't give them back. It's not a foster parent situation where you have them temporarily. And you want them to understand and feel the weight of that decision, almost like a wedding, right? If any here object, or that's your moment, because you're going to commit to this other person. So just being able to walk with families and seeing these children, some of whom come through terrible situations, find a loving home has been very rewarding. And to those pro-aborts that often say we don't care, we the church don't care about children out of the womb.
That's exactly
what
it.
a lie.
Yeah.
What a lie. What they mean is we don't vote for whatever welfare program because they want the state to raise these children. And let me tell you something I've learned, and you know this if you've been a part of the foster system. The state is a terrible parent. The state is a terrible parent.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your work in that area. For us, this is not just a vague generality. This is personal. A few things are more important to us. And one of the most impactful moments of my life was sitting across from a biological mother and father and seeing within them, at least this is our story. I know there are many different types, a desire to make sure that these children were taken care of
Mm.
and intentionally seeking that out, knowing that they were not in the position to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And knowing what God was entrusting, and they were entrusting us with, seeing the picture of the gospel through that, and then our minds reeling with the what ifs. What if it would have turned out this way and that way? But in God's providence, it didn't. It turned out the way it did.
Yeah, that's beautiful. We play that game too. The what ifs. I'm reminded of, what if Moses's mother had not given him up?
Mm-hmm.
And,
Yeah.
I mean, that was an external danger, right? And she saved his life.
Yeah.
And as part of that, she had to put him in the river. I mean, talk about a measure of faith. Putting your baby in a basket and floating him
Trusting
down the
God.
river. But it went to, of all people, Pharaoh's
Yeah.
daughter. And so she adopted the greatest leader of the people of Israel who led
Yeah.
them to freedom, right? And so you ask a what if? What if Jochebed had held on to Moses when she was supposed to let him go?
So powerful. Let's keep moving. Another issue I want to get to. I'm beginning to wonder if you went to Auburn University, because if I Google your name, Ben Dupre, plus Auburn University, you have some close ties. So an article came up, 1819 News, kind of outlines the situation.
Has your church heard of 1819 News, by the way?
They've heard
I would
of
like to plug them in case Reformation Baptist Church has never heard of 1819 News. I really think highly of them. Just wanted to slip that in.
Click the bell, hit subscribe, donate button. So an entirely different battlefront. Take us there. What happened? The DEI wokeness. You've been involved in this as well.
Yeah, I'm privileged to be part of the Federalist Society, which is a group of conservative with some libertarian judges and attorneys. I say that because in Trump's first term, he thankfully picked heavily from Federalist Society judges, and they've turned out to be some of the best. Not all of them. Sometimes people get on the bench and they just take a leftward tack. There's not much you can do, but it's a good group. And through my connections with Federalist Society over this past year, I spoke with a gentleman. He said, "Hey, I've got this issue at Auburn. I might need your help." He's in Texas, and together we worked on uncovering the fact that Auburn. And by the way, I did pick Alabama when I moved here. So let me immediately divide your audience by saying that I do roll tide. I married a roll tider, and that's just how I've rolled since. So, but Auburn, I have a lot of friends that love Auburn and are there even now. They, like a lot of schools, have been pushing scholarships. And if you read 1819 News, you're very familiar with the DEI stuff, the so-called diversity, equity, and inclusion
in all of our institutions
that are still there, even though the state banned it. They've kind of whitewashed them.
Rebranded them.
That's probably the inappropriate word to use, but
yeah,
they have rebranded them. But they're still they're playing a shell game, and they just call it by something else. Well, Auburn, to this day, actually, if you pull up their scholarships, they still have a number of scholarships that are race-based, expressly so, called minority scholarship. They even say they'll favor, African Americans or minority, or basically they're looking for Black students and applicants. So right up front, they're advertising this. Others will require or prefer membership in a race-based group, like Society of Black Engineers. I don't think I would be applying to that. That just kind of weeds out those of us that are not that. I mean, they would say, "Oh no, it's open to everybody." Well, we discovered these sitting on their website. There were actually some other schools that we looked at, and to their credit, they had started to pull those off. They were not pushing race-based scholarships, but Auburn persisted. And so in the summer, the American Civil Rights Project and I sent a letter to Auburn and to their president. We did copy the Attorney General and the governor because we just wanted them to be aware. But basically laid out, here are 17 scholarships that Auburn is offering, or the Auburn Foundation, that are expressly either based on race or based on membership in a racially defined group. And we sent it off, and we said we hope this doesn't lead to litigation. But to my knowledge, Auburn still has not removed it.
Really?
Yeah, really.
Wow.
I got a lot of heat from one of the gentlemen that had set up one of those scholarships. He took great umbrage at the fact that we had listed his scholarship, and he flamed me on LinkedIn. And I thought, no, please don't give this any attention. Don't throw me in the briar patch. He was highly offended, and all his other lefty friends were harumphing and calling me all sorts of names. But I said, well, the problem is Auburn is engaging in racial discrimination with its scholarships, and if they knock it off, we'll knock it off. So, those are some fun things of just people still, I thought if they're really judicial supremacists, shouldn't they be following what the Supreme Court has now held, which is that colleges cannot engage in race-based admissions policies, at least, and by extension, we would argue scholarships as well. So when are we going to actually stop racial discrimination? Chief Justice Roberts, for all his flaws, actually said the way to stop racial discrimination is to stop racially discriminating. I mean, when are we going to stop? When are we finally going to quit looking at skin color as a qualifying or disqualifying feature?
It's remarkable is all of these different battlefronts, or at least most of them, maybe all of them, have been right here in our own backyard, and several of these having national flames. So the battlefront's being brought right here to us in so many different ways. And there's things we haven't even gotten to. Capital punishment. You have studied this area. You've defended street preachers in Montgomery. There's so many different ways that Christians can be involved, ways Christians can be praying, and ways that we need to be alert, ways that we need to be aware.
I think. Let me say this for those listening. I think we get really lax and relaxed when there's a Republican in the White House, and we forget that there are still lefty governors, lefty mayors, lefty school boards that are hard at work tearing down the foundations of this nation. And just because we have a president who kind of flips the switch for a while on the national level on many of these issues, not all, I think we tend to think we're good. Our team is in control now, and we can back off. We can disengage with the culture. And I just encourage people, no, now is the time to be ever more on alert, because all politics is local. I mean, Alabama is fighting. It's ridiculous that we have to be fighting to keep porn books about queer kids out of our public libraries. And the argument isn't even, do we get it out of the library? It's, do we get it out of the kids section? So sometimes I think we engage with the left on their playing field.
And they move the Overton window.
Those books shouldn't be in any public library, no matter the section. They should be in a fire in the dumpster out back that we should. I think Reformation Day would be a good day for that.
That'd be a perfect day.
Can we do a queer kid book burning here for Reformation Day?
That's exactly what I've been thinking. Why aren't we fighting to get them out of the children's section? Why aren't we fighting just to get rid of them and burn them all together? Why aren't we negotiating with the devil? I don't understand that.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like those who are still arguing that I can't believe the public schools are pushing these policies on my kids. And as the late great Vodi Bakum would say, why do we send our kids to Caesar and complain when they come back to us as Romans? So, the public school is never going to serve the interests of the church. Caesar is never going to preach the gospel or allow it to be preached. And I know there's a lot of good Christians and Christian families, and they may feel they have no other option but to send their kids to public school. But I think that it's a similar battle. They want the ability to opt out. So all the other kids in that room can be pushed into transgenderism and others,
And the problem with that issue and many others is we say, and rightly say, and I stand behind it, get your children out of public school immediately. But then someone says, what about the single mom who's trying to raise 3 kids on a poverty level income? And it's like, why do we point to the most extreme situation in order to reverse the principle?
Yeah, I don't know a solid biblically based Christian school that would turn that child away.
Right. Right.
So it's And people always go to the extreme. Well, what about this 11-year-old that's raped? Shouldn't she have the right to an abortion?
Yeah.
And it's a terrible situation, not because she has to abort the child. It's a terrible situation because she was raped.
Mm-hmm.
And well, I'm not going to go into that, but we often look at the extreme.
Yeah.
It's like, but if you ask those on the left, okay, if we allow abortion for that 0.1%, would you agree to ban the others? Of course not.
Yeah.
They use the extreme, example to try to get the whole camel's nose into the tent.
Last issue, and briefly, let's go to the very end of life. You studied this area, have some experience here. So we've talked about the very beginning of life. We've talked about issues in the center of life. Capital punishment. So is capital punishment upholding the pro-life position, or are we shooting ourselves in the foot?
Yeah, good question. Again, I'm going to alienate my Catholic friends, but it is Reformation Sunday soon. Yeah, I think a strong pro-life ethic and a biblical understanding of who gives us life and who gives us permission and when to take life, all that to say that the pro-life position is pro-capital punishment. And I don't say that out of any bloodlust. I say that because the God who gives life also can give the power to man, as he has done, to take life. In other words, we can't be more pro-life than God. And I think certain Catholics think we can never take life, and that's the ultimate pro-life position, when God actually demanded capital punishment. And I heard the argument, well, we're not under the Mosaic law. Well, plot twist, capital punishment precedes Moses. When Noah and his family came off the ark, the command was, let's try this again, be fruitful and multiply. But God gave laws this time because man hadn't done so well. Other than being fruitful and multiplying, he had been very fruitful in sin and evil and all those ways, and had multiplied all sorts of murder and terrible things. So God had to wipe us out. So one of the first and only rules we read of to Noah and his family was, whosoever sheds man's blood, by man shall his blood be shed. It's right there in Genesis 9:6. Or 6:9, I might have that backwards. And so you read a command. It's not well, you should consider the death penalty if you really think it's warranted.
Or hire a therapeutic counselor to go in and...
Yeah, or rehabilitate him.
Rehabilitate,
No, it's, if someone murders, you take their life. Now we get better, we get due process kind of laid out under Israel's law. The 2-witness rule. There are certain that they get due process. They get a trial. The facts have to be found on 2 or more witnesses, right? And we see that carried through the New Testament. And also, witnesses are under a heavy perjury punishment, that if they lie under oath, they get the punishment that the accused would have gotten. So, boy, that would clean up our court system right quick, in my opinion. So you see God giving that law not just to Israel. There was no Israel. It was Noah and his family, and only a third of them Israel would come from, right? One of the 3. So God gives that to the nations, in my opinion, preceding Moses, preceding the Mosaic covenant. It's the Noahide or the Noahic covenant that gets the death penalty. And why? Because he had told them to be fruitful and multiply. And if life isn't protected by the heaviest punishment we have, which is capital punishment,
it would devalue life.
We'll continue to get Cain, that spirit of murder that cut off half of the original population. How many would have come from the line of Abel? See, when a murder is committed, whether in the womb, out of the womb, you probably know this, that when Cain killed Abel, and there's this heavy passage when God says, Cain, where is your brother? And we all know the response of, well, I'm my brother's keeper. And God says, his blood is crying out to me from the ground.
Wow.
And it's my understanding that the Jewish word used there is actually a plural, that it's his bloods. God not only sees dead Abel, but he can see who would have come from the line of Abel. All those generations, which by now had would be billions, maybe, would come from that line. And thankfully, God sent Seth, and we had a godly line come from Seth to replace Abel. But Cain lived. So what is my point? That God sees an entire generation and descendants from those generations when there's one murder. It doesn't just kill one person, it cuts off a line.
So the implications of sin and the implications of death. And then you jump to the New Testament, where the power of the sword is given to the civil magistrate. Well, the last I checked, swords aren't used to tickle feet.
No, they're not used for spanking either,
No.
are they? And so, yeah, I mean, that's a very specific metaphor.
Yeah.
That, and as you know, Paul didn't appeal to Caesar and say, hey, this death penalty thing is wrong. In fact, what did he say? He said, if I deserve to die, then I'll die.
Yeah.
He validated the death penalty. He just said it doesn't apply to anything I've done.
Yeah.
And so, of course, Christ submitted to the death penalty himself in the worst form of execution at the time and maybe ever.
Yeah.
As if to demonstrate his great love for us through the death penalty that he did not deserve. And so the deserving should get death penalty, not for theft. There are Muslim countries that will just, take the life of somebody for a property crime. I think it's reserved only for murder. Maybe there's an argument for rape and, certain violent crimes.
And even then, we want to preach the gospel. We want to see them saved. We want to see them in heaven. But there's still a justice that has to be enacted.
Yeah. I remember people arguing Carla Faye Tucker. Do you remember this Texas woman who poisoned her husband? Thankfully, came to saving faith in Christ, it seems. And then this is where a lot of evangelicals lose it. Then they claim she should have been paroled at that point.
Yeah.
And I would say a proper understanding of justice is that, praise God, her sins are forgiven. But God told us that justice still must be meted out. And in the Old Testament, we see he even says to drag the murderer from the horns of the altar.
Yeah.
That's the mercy seat. That's where you throw yourself on the mercy seat. If there was ever a place God would say, well, if he makes it there, he must be really sorry. Don't kill him. God says, drag him from there and put him to death.
Wow.
That's how emphatic God is about protecting life by taking the guilty life who has spilled innocent blood, because the blood curses the land. And he says the only way to remove the blood guilt from the land is to justly take the life of the wicked.
All of this is where theology meets life at some very hot points. Brother, we have kept you 2 or maybe 3 or maybe 4 times longer than we planned. Thank you for taking the time. We've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
Exhilarating.
I don't know if you'll have me back,
edifying.
because I think we covered it all, but what a privilege and a joy it is to talk.
I have questions.
Law, theology,
I have questions for you in part 2 about Salem, Massachusetts, about Montgomery, Alabama. We'll have to continue. Close us with some recommendations. You mentioned 2 already. Can you repeat those?
Yeah. Oh, as far as books.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning to bring this up, but in our family, The Wild Love of God by Chris Dupré. My uncle, love him dearly, and it's a beautiful book of the Father's wild love for us. And it's also a cool World War II story. That's how it starts, with my grandfather and his story of getting shot down and captured. The other book would be So Help Me God by Roy Moore. It's not only his autobiography, but it also talks about all of these issues, about how God gives us rights, about the founding fathers, and how, God and religion and Christianity were at the center of what they founded here. And we ought not to just so easily walk away from that or give that up.
Brother, thank you for being here.
Thank you. God bless.
Thank you for joining us at Everyday Reformation. You can find us on all of the major podcast platforms and YouTube. What are your thoughts and questions about this topic? Send them to us. Go to our Facebook page and comment on YouTube. And with that, may we be the church reformed and always being reformed according to Scripture.